The Leica 28mm Summicron. This was the main lens that was glued to my M240 and my M10 between 2015 and 2020, and it's been with me on quite a few trips overseas, as well as by my side on a daily basis around Singapore. So today I wanted to chat with you a bit about this lens, both in terms of its physical design and its optical qualities that results in the kinds of pictures that it makes, but also what it does really well compared to every other 28mm M mount lens. So let's jump right in. Hey, Jeremy here, and this is the Leica 28mm F2 Summicron. Now this lens is a modern one, so it's pretty much opposite to the 35mm Pre ASPH Summilux, which I covered in an earlier video. With this lens, instead of getting character, you'll be getting consistency. Its look is pretty much consistent from f2 to f16, so as you open up the aperture, you'll be getting more light and you'll be introducing more background blur, but you won't be introducing any more character like an older lens. In terms of its rendering, to me, it most closely resembles the 35mm spherical Summicron. So if you have that lens, this is going to feel very much like a wider version of that, like its older brother. And that's a great thing because the 35mm spherical Summicron is a beautiful lens. Now the word that best describes this lens to me is transparent. It doesn't add too much to your scene and just gives you a transparent rendering of what you're making a picture of. It doesn't add too much contrast or saturation the way other lenses sometimes can do, but it isn't too flat or dull either, and that's what makes it really special. It holds together in tough lighting situations with just the right amount of contrast, and it retains a nice amount of shadow detail, but not too much that things fall off to black too quickly, but also not too little contrast that the picture falls apart when lighting gets tricky. To me, it's its tonal balance which makes it really special, not doing too much or too little of any one thing. It also handles colors really nicely, and that's definitely one of its strong points. Not too warm the way some Voigtlander lenses can get, and not too cool either, so it sits at a very neutral balanced point with just the right amount of saturation. Some older Summicrons like the 35mm or the 50mm ones can sometimes look a little dull, but this retains colors very nicely. It also renders background blur in quite an interesting way, and it has a slight touch of pulling towards the sides, and it isn't too flat or even. Sometimes modern lenses renders the out of focus areas in a very flat, even way, which can look very boring, but with the Summicron, you're still getting a hint of some character. It does flare very slightly when you shoot into backlight, but to me, it's just the right amount of character to make it feel a little more dynamic and lively instead of being too controlled, which sometimes can feel a little clinical and did. For example, in comparison to say the Leica Q, the lens on the Leica Q renders in a much more modern way, so if you want something a little more charming and with a slight bit of character, the 28mm Summicron might fit you very well. Compared to other 28mm M mount lenses, I think this is pretty much the best 28 f2 that you could get. A close second would be the newest Voigtlander 28 f2 version 2 Ultron, and that has some strong points as well. The Voigtlander V2 renders out of focus areas in a more circular way, which can be very nice, and it also has a little more crispness in the way it transitions tones with a slightly higher amount of localized contrast, but in general I tend to prefer the colors and the overall balance that the Summicron gives. The Voigtlander 28mm version 1 doesn't do backlight very well, and it sometimes can give pictures a slightly plasticky quality in tough lighting situations. And the Zeiss 28mm f2.8 Biogon is really sharp, but it handles contrast in a less refined way. And the colors aren't as nice as the Summicron as well. So in terms of getting the best of both worlds, having good modern optical performance while still having a touch of character, I think the 28mm Summicron does really well. In terms of its build quality, this is the version 1 with a plastic square hood, and there's a newer version with a metal hood, and from a reliability point of view, you might want to get the newer one because the version 1 has a known problem where some of the internal screws could get loose and the entire front section of the lens could spin freely over time. And that happened to me, and I had to send the lens into Leica, Germany, which cost a few $100s, and I had to wait for a few months, but they said that they replaced the entire front section with a newer assembly and assured me that with this new design it would never happen again. So that's something to watch out for if you're getting the version 1 of this lens. In terms of price, it has pretty much held on to its value since I first bought it in 2015. So if you have the budget to spare and you're deciding on getting a 28mm lens for your Leica, I don't think you'll go wrong with the 28mm Summicron. That's all for today's video. Jeremy here. If you enjoyed that, subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.